Focal length, more than any other attribute of SLR photography, separates it from the point and shoot variety by giving photographers the ability to change their focal length and to really customize the photography experience through this vast collection of lenses. You've really given people the opportunity to take photographs in a way that they can't with point and shoot cameras.
So if you're new to SLR photography, whether it's digital or standard, you're probably also new to the concept of changing out lenses. And if you've just used point and shoot cameras in the past where you had a little zoom feature on your camera, you have some idea of what you can do with lenses. But with SLR photography, you can really go a long way towards customizing the types of images you're going to shoot. So to start things off, there are three basic focal length categories when it comes to lenses for SLR cameras. You have wide-angle lenses, standard lenses, and you have telephoto lenses. But within those three focal length categories, you also have two very distinct types of lenses. One is a zoom lens, where you can change your focal length from one number to another. In this case, we can go from 70 to 200. The other type is a fixed focal length or prime lens. In this case, we have a 20 millimeter lens, and that's all it does. So there's no zooming in, no zooming out. What you see is what you get through that lens.
Zoom lenses tend to be heavier. They tend to be a bit slower on the minimum aperture, but they do offer the advantage and the convenience of offering a multiple focal length all in one lens. Prime lenses are smaller, they're lighter, they tend to be faster when it comes to the aperture, but the problem is they have to be changed every time you want to change focal length, so you must swap out lenses. In many cases, in dangerous situations where dust and dirt can enter if you're outdoors, and therefore jeopardizing the cleanliness of the image sensor and perhaps forcing the camera to later down the road be cleaned professionally.
So regardless of the type of category of focal length you're shooting for or that you want to attach to your camera, you have a lot of different options at your disposal when it comes to buying lenses. And you kind of have to know what's important to you. Do you need a lens that, for example, can open up the aperture a great deal and allow a lot of light in for low light situations? So a lens that can maybe go to f2 or f2.8.
So here, looking at this chart, you can get a good idea of the difference between a wide-angle lens and a telephoto lens when it comes to angle of view. With a wide-angle lens, you're seeing much more of the space around you in the final image when you compose it through your camera. With a telephoto lens, you get a much narrower field of view, and therefore you start to pick and choose subjects differently. And you'll notice that when you're looking through a telephoto lens, things will jump out at you much more clearly and announce themselves as subjects in a way that they won't necessarily do with wide-angle lenses when you have a lot more items competing for your attention. Another major difference that you'll find in looking through wide-angle lenses versus telephoto lenses is that wide-angle lenses tend to exaggerate the distance between foreground and background, while telephoto lenses tend to compress that. So if you line up a shot where you have someone standing close to the camera and then they have a backdrop behind them, such as a church or a house or a building or a mountain, you'll probably notice that with a wide-angle lens, the person seems further removed from that background. And with a telephoto lens, it will seem to marry the two together, and you'll seem to compress the space rather than separate it physically. Medium lenses or standard lenses will tend to render the foreground and background elements more neutrally, and rather than favor compressing or exaggerating the distance on the z-space or the depth between the two objects, they'll tend to give you a view that's closer to the way the photographer saw it when they were taking the picture. Here's a few samples of what it would look like to look through a lens of different focal length. So here's a 20 millimeter lens, and you'll notice here we can see quite a variety of subjects. There's a lot of things here competing for our attention. As we move in closer, now we're at 50 millimeter lens. Here we're more rendering things more neutrally. We're going to get less curvature of the lens, less visible distortion, but we also are kind of in a mid-ground here. As we go further and further into the telephoto range, here's 75 millimeters, we start to get the sensation that our field of view is narrowing, but also that individual items and individual subjects can be more visibly drawn out. So now we're at 135, and clearly this painting is now commanding our attention, or this sculpture here. And here's 200 to 300. You notice now that just the little minutest details of this carving there on the wall is drawing our attention, whereas just a few moments ago, back with that 20 millimeter lens, we're seeing things much more differently. Notice that sculpture, or that detail that we just looked at, is just one of the many items that's competing for our attention here. Now here's an example of the exaggeration of the distance between the two objects, the object in the foreground, the object in the background. Notice here we're using a wide-angle lens, and we have a strong sense of space between these two items. And now with a telephoto lens, it just feels as though the statue is closer and distance to that background, that monument behind it. And as a result, as a subject matter, the two tend to get married together. Specialty lenses offer you unique opportunities in rendering images. Tilt and shift, macro, and fisheye are three specialty lenses that can achieve looks that could not be achieved otherwise with standard lenses. Here's a look at three different tilt and shift lenses. The one on the left there, the Canon, is an example of a lens that's where you can really fine-tune things, and it's a more professional version of what we have on the right there. The Lens Baby lens on the right is more of a fun kind of a snorkel camera that is a variation of tilt and shift, and it's fun to play with, but not as easy to control as what we have on the left there with the Canon, and the optics are not going to be as good. But there's a wide variety of tilt and shift lenses out there on the market for different types of cameras with different mounts. Here's one example of what you can achieve with a tilt and shift lens. Now in this case, we're rendering a landscape that, and giving an illusion of a really, really strong, soft depth of focus. And so we have an extreme amount of soft focus there in the foreground and the background. And it gives the illusion that we're looking at almost a model, as something that is a small scale model, a small scale replica of the real thing instead of a real river or a real train track. It gives that illusion of just something that's really tiny. But it also gives you an opportunity as a photographer to really selectively focus on an area in a way that may not be possible with a standard lens, even using depth of field tactics. This is another primary reason for using a tilt and shift lens, and probably the reason most people put one on their camera, is to correct perspective lines. You notice here on the left, there's a lot of lines leading us away from the ground, and those diagonal lines kind of give us a sense of distortion in rendering that tower there on the left. And then we correct it. When it's corrected with a tilt and shift lens, we're able to get those perspective lines straightened and give a much more distortion-free rendering of this building. Macro lenses are designed to get you up close to the subject. So you can take your lens, and if it's got a macro setting, or if it's just a specially designed macro lens, you can get that lens and put it right up against your subject. So we're talking a range of a few inches different distance between the glass element of the lens and the subject itself, which if you try to do that with a standard lens, you're not going to be able to focus on that item at that range, at that distance. Most lenses are going to have a minimum focal range of a foot or so at least, and you'll not be able to get this close up. So macro lenses are great for nature shots like these, or just any time you want to get a really detailed perspective on anything. Fisheye lenses take wide-angle lenses to an extreme, and you'll see there on the standard version, they really distort reality to a point where you can see the world around you in a very unique perspective, and they're fun to play with, and they can really give you unique perspectives on what you're taking a photo of. But full frame tend to be a little bit more practical when it comes to finding places to put your photos. It just seems to be a little bit more practical to use the full frame version of the fisheye, but nonetheless, both can give you really spectacularly wide perspectives on your subjects and keep everything in focus at the same time. You notice how every little detail on the arm feeding the cow there is focused, as well as the cow itself, as well as the leaves on the trees behind it and the clouds in the distance. So really amazing depth of field there, and depth of focus is just spectacular.
So there are a lot of different practical things to take into consideration when choosing a lens and which is best for you and the type of shooting that you do. But what I'll do now is just briefly go over the different categories for those people who are new to this, and then talk a little bit about some of the more detailed items later on. So first off, the ultra-wide zoom lenses, something like this, 17 to 40 millimeter lens. These lenses are designed primarily for landscapes or situations where you want to compare foreground and background subjects and you want to incorporate a wide field of view. Now, you can get wide-angle lenses in either prime or zoom format. These are the zoom variations. Going down here, we'll show you the prime versions. Okay, here's some wide-angle prime lenses, and you can see the numbers that we're looking at here. Anything from 14, which is at the super wide fisheye category, all the way up through 35 millimeters is really considered to be a wide-angle lens. Some people don't really think of 35 millimeter as wide-angle, but anything below 50 is really wide-angle when it comes to categories. Standard and medium telephoto lenses range from 50 millimeters all the way up to 100, and these lenses might be used for anything like still lifes through portraits. Most people feel that telephoto lenses have a more flattering effect on the human face by de-emphasizing the nose, for example, and flattening out facial features. They're able to do that quite well with a telephoto lens. The category of telephoto brings us up through the 135 to 300 range. Now, again, for portraits, we're probably only talking about the 135 to 200 range, unless we're shooting for events where we can't get close to our subjects as close as we'd like to, such as perhaps certain weddings or event photography or sporting events where you really have a barrier between you and your subjects. But when you're in a more intimate shooting environment, you're probably going to be more along the range of 100 millimeters through 135 to 200. Beyond that, we've got super telephoto lenses, which are really ideal for wildlife photography, for getting close to subjects that are quite small or subjects that are very dangerous, where we have to be quite a distance away and we have no choice in the matter. Then the super telephoto lenses are definitely the way to go. You'll see these along the sidelines of professional football games, for example, where you have a very large field that you cannot trespass on, and you want to get those nice close-up shots of players. That's what you're going to look for, is something along the lines of this category. Of course, wildlife photography, when you're taking pictures of small birds, or if you're in Africa taking pictures of dangerous animals, then this, again, is going to be your area. Those are the basic categories you have at your disposal, but beyond that, there are also some additional features that you can look for. One of those is the macro feature, like this lens has here. This is just a standard 50 millimeter fixed lens, but it has an additional macro feature attached to it, which allows it to take images of things that are very, very close to the lens. Normally, a lens might have a limitation of 1 to 2 feet in terms of how far away it can focus. So it cannot focus on anything closer than 1 to 2 feet away from it. Whereas a macro lens can focus all the way up to within a few inches of a subject, allowing you to get really nice close-up shots of flowers, insects, small items that you'd not be able to focus on without the macro feature. There are also lenses that allow you to tilt and shift. This allows you to take pictures of buildings, for example, without any perspective distortion, to make them look straight and angular as opposed to receding away from us, away from the camera. On top of that, you've also got lenses that are only manual focus and those that do both manual and automatic focus. You've got lenses that are quieter than others. You've got lenses that will allow you to open up to wider apertures because they're faster than other lenses are, meaning they can let more light in, allowing you to more flexibility when it comes to shutter speed, and therefore the name faster. But in reality, they just have wider apertures than other lenses. So they might go to f2 or f2.8 as opposed to f5.6 or f4. And oftentimes, you'll pay more money for those lenses for that luxury of going up a few stops extra. There are lenses that allow for more critical focus by giving you a reading system right on the lens, and so you can use tape measures to get more accurate focus adjustments. There are all sorts of variables. There's even lenses now that have image stabilization items built into them so that they can help you take more stable images through handheld photography without using tripods, and they're able to get much sharper, jitter-free images without resorting to extravagant shutter speeds. Well, those are just some of the few of the options you have available to you when it comes to focal length and the different categories of lenses. In addition to that, you might also consider lenses that have some sort of flare guard that protects from unwanted light coming in from the side and creating flares on your lens. Some people like to go out and buy UV filters to cover the front of the lens to prevent from scratching, or in case they get a scratch on the glass, they can replace the UV filter and not the whole lens, which would obviously be a lot more costly. Filters are a whole other category, so I won't go into that, but some of the little add-ons that you might consider for your lenses that not only protect the lenses, but also just add a little bit more towards their flexibility and using them in the field. Some of the hoods are a little bit more involved than others, but there are all kinds of attachments that you can buy in addition to the lens itself.